Oh, okay. We ready to start?
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I always like to do that part. Okay. So should I just start with the land acknowledgement then? Okay. The land that Eureka rests on is known in the Wiyot language as Jeruji. Past actions by local, state, and federal governments removed the Wiyot and other indigenous peoples from the land and threatened to destroy their cultural practices. The city of Eureka acknowledged the Wiyot community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement demonstrates the city's commitment to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Can we have the roll call, please?
You may. Okay. Committee Member Paris is not with us. Committee Member Byfield? Here. Committee Member, you have to sit up and turn your mic on.
Here.
Thank you. Committee Member Hancock is not with us. Committee Member Hunter?
Here.
Committee Member Clore?
Here.
Committee Member Mays?
Here.
And Committee Member Reiki is not with us.
All right. And so public comment. Do we have anybody on Zoom?
We do not.
Okay, and there's no one in the audience, so there's no public comment. Approval of the minutes. The recommendation is the approval of the regular Finance Advisory Committee meeting minutes of June 11th, 2025.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Let's vote. Aye.
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 And we've approved the meeting minutes of June 11th, 2025. So let's move on to reports. So we have the fiscal year 2024-25 budget review. Lane, I take it it's going to be a presentation? Okay, you're on.
Right. Good evening.
Hi.
Before I begin, I just want to introduce one of my coworkers, Susanna Jenny. She's here just to support me. She works as an accountant down in the finance department. We have two other individuals who also operate as accountants, but they're currently serving our financial auditors who are currently downstairs. So, yeah, they're a little bit more busy than I am today, but I'm happy to be here. So this is kind of part of our effort to get this group together more often. I thought a good way to end the calendar year is by kind of looking back. Typically when we're talking budgets, we're always forward looking, but I think it's good to kind of review our work and to and because we've finalized the numbers for last fiscal year, I think it's a good opportunity for us to see how we did. So tonight's presentation will have three parts. We're going to look at fiscal year 24-25 budget versus actual. We're going to look at the general fund and then our major enterprise funds. We'll talk about bond financing. The city issued a bond back in August. This was a lease revenue bond. That was for some facility projects. We intend to do another bond issuance later in the fiscal year, so I'll talk about that. And then the last part of the presentation, I will just lay out what we have in front of us, at least for this fiscal year. So we'll begin with the first section, budget versus actual. So the first fund we'll look at is the city's main operating fund, the general fund. We're going to look at revenues. The purpose of this pie chart isn't to explain all the different revenues the city has. It's really to point out the most significant revenue source, which is sales tax. This is important to understand because unfortunately, sales tax can be very volatile. So when the economy is good, we tend to see this revenue source go up. And when we enter, or if we're going into a recession, this revenue stream reacts to that, and we tend to see big drops. This is just an important piece of information to understand because we don't have any control over these revenues. It's really the activity out in the community that dictates how much revenue we see in this category. Other tax revenues like property tax tend to stay pretty steady. You don't see property taxes go up very often or go up in large increases, but it's a steady increase typically. TOT does track with sales tax, but usually it's not as significant as the changes we see in our sales tax revenues. Other sources of revenues tend to reflect the cost of doing business. Usually these things are cost recovery. So despite fluctuations in those revenue streams, they don't really, provide what we think of as a profit or loss. If we provide more services or more permits or licenses, that means we've spent more staff time and paid for more materials. So those revenues and costs tend to net out. So we'll move on from the pie chart and we will look at what we budgeted and what actually happened. So at the very top, we have our clearly our largest revenue source, under 27 million. When we budgeted for the fiscal year, we estimated about 26.5 for sales tax revenues. I do use the assistance of HDL. They're a consultant that helps me forecast sales tax revenues. And as you can see, there was a very small difference in that revenue stream, thankfully. So despite it being, pretty much what we budgeted, that was good news. We have seen a trend over the past few years of the sales tax, the actuals not coming in at the budget amount. So here we have a property tax, including a vehicle license fee in lieu. So a number of years ago, the city or most municipalities were receiving vehicle license fees, and the state decided to swap out that revenue stream for additional property tax revenues. Vehicle license fee in lieu tends to grow at the same rate as property taxes. They're not the same thing as property taxes, but they're very close. Despite saying that property taxes don't tend to change very much, since 2020, due to real estate prices, we are seeing our property tax coming in at above average levels. Transient occupancy tax. This is actually one of the brighter areas of our revenues. It came in 5% higher. That is great news because it started to decrease around fiscal year 21-22. And with the total of about 3.5 million in fiscal year 24-25, we actually set a new record. So that was good news. Another bright spot is the Sequoia Park Zoo. You can go back to fiscal year 18-19, and the total revenue of the zoo was roughly $400,000. So obviously today, reaching almost 2.5 million. The canopy walk, as well as a few other exhibits and the gift shop, have really made the profit and loss statements of the zoo be more exciting and less depressing, at least for myself. We are almost breaking even today, so we're trying to maintain that break even, or that's our goal, is to break even. We're not trying to create a profit. Historically, the subsidy to the zoo was upwards of about $800,000. So just breaking even is quite an accomplishment. Next, we have franchise fees. So the city receives franchise fees for cable, for gas and electric, and for garbage. Typically, these fees usually grow when rates for either cable, PG&E, or Recology go up. So even though that might not be good news to the public, it does provide the city with additional revenues. And then intergovernmental. So intergovernmental represents revenues that come from other government agencies A lot of times these are grants. We see a lot of volatility in this category because in one year we might have one grant, and the next year we might have 5. Grants usually just cover the costs of providing that service, or if they're given to us to build something, they simply cover the cost of that activity. They don't usually represent something that provides a profit to the city. And then there are many other revenues that go into the general fund, including business license fees, animal license fees, fines, and a number of rec programs create revenues. It would take a whole presentation just to go through all of those. But at the end of the day, when we look back at fiscal year 24-25, we can see that our revenues actually came in about 2% higher than what was budgeted, roughly $800,000 more than we anticipated. Next, we'll move on to the expenditure side. So the city's general fund expenditures are a little bit more diversified than the city's revenues at first glance. But when you understand that not only do we have this category of personnel costs or salaries and benefits, most of what we provide, and sorry to abbreviate here, Humboldt Bay Fire. So we pay a portion of their budget, about 62.5%. And when you look at their budget, you realize that most of their budget are salaries and benefits as well. So most of that slice of pie is, again, salaries and benefits. And then this category of cost allocation. So what cost allocation is the recognition that we or departments have what is called overhead. So the finance department, the HR department, city manager, we have to reimburse for the expenses in those departments. So what we do is we use a allocation factor like number of personnel or size of budget. So most of those cost centers go through the cost allocation accounts, and most of those costs are associated with, again, salaries and benefits. So even though I've created this pie chart that shows these different expense categories, at the end of the day, the city is a service entity. So most of our costs have to do with paying our employees. So going down the list, overall, there was very little volatility in the budget versus actual on the expenditure side. As you can see, we budgeted about $19.3 million in salaries and benefits, and we spent about $19.3 in salaries and benefits. Other categories like materials and supplies are much less significant. And again, when I'm not looking at percent changes of 10% or greater, or dollar values that go into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, this somewhat represents the fact that there's, you can't get around uncertainty when you do budget projections. We can have a good idea of where we're headed, but not an exact representation of the future. So, you should expect small dollar changes or small percent changes and small dollar changes, just given the natural fact of that we don't own a crystal ball. So just going down the list, again, Humboldt Bay Fire is what I've abbreviated to HBF. The reason why you see that line coming in under $200,000 was that when we were preparing the fiscal year 24-25 budget, we were also in negotiations with the fire union. So I did my best to estimate what would be the end result. And I tend to be pretty conservative in my expenditure estimates. So capital outlay, we did see above average spending in our capital outlay accounts. A lot of this had to do with the Sequoia Park Zoo. Last fiscal year, we built out what is considered the Zoo Lights event. So we hired some help to put those lights up on the canopy walk, and we had to upgrade some electrical work. So that came in over, that project came in over $100,000. We did not have that in the budget, but we did use some monies that the Humboldt Area Foundation holds to fund that project. The largest difference, at least in terms of dollar value, had to do with the category of transfers out. So when you see transfers out in a fund, typically what is happening is that is cash going into a CIP fund or a capital improvement program fund. So for the general fund, a transfer out, most of that is going for street projects. So roughly 200,000, or in fiscal year 24-25, we dedicated about $2.5 million for street projects. But then during the fiscal year, the engineering department received a grant that covered about $600,000 of our annual pavement project. So therefore, we were able to reduce the amount that we transferred over during 24-25. This reduction really drove the bottom line. So in total, we anticipated about $42.7 million in spending in the general fund, and we ended the year at about $42.2 million. So we did see about $550,000 of savings. So when I compare revenues to expenditures, you can see that even though the budget showed a structural deficit or a deficit, we ended the year with revenues exceeding expenditures by roughly $400,000. I just want to point out it's very common to see us start the year with what looks like a deficit. This reflects my budgeting style, where I like to be very, very conservative with the expense side of the budget, and very pessimistic with the revenue side. I tend to do that because the result is what you see right here. It's always good to expect the worst, and then, or I guess, just expect the worst. So that's been very helpful in increasing fund balance over the last 5 years. Okay, moving on to the water fund. So the water fund is fairly simple when we look at the revenues. We raise revenues in this fund by sending out water bills, by providing utility connections, and also by providing some small services. So overall, when you look at that top line, mostly the charges for services are coming from our ratepayers. And then one big section of ratepayer is the Humboldt Community Services District. We do provide them with some wholesale water that runs through our system and gets to them over by the treatment plant. We did see some intergovernmental revenues come in. That was coming from ARPA, or the American Rescue Plan Act. That allocation included uses for water and wastewater. We decided to dedicate some of that allocation to our water fund. And then other revenues, most of that includes pooled cash interest. So just interest that we earned by having cash in the bank. Overall, we saw our revenues come in about $600,000 more than what we had budgeted. On the expenditure side, overall, pretty steady, not much movement in any one category. Aside from the last one, our transfers out. So when we prepared the fiscal year 24-25 budget, we were looking at capital projects for the year, and based on the financial projections, I was only comfortable allocating about $1 million for capital projects. But then during the year, when we did the mid-year process, we realized that things were coming in better than expected. So we decided to essentially double that amount to introduce a new water capital project. So overall, we did see a large jump in expenditures, but that's because we had the revenues to support it. As you can see, when we prepared the budget, it was roughly a balanced budget, a little bit of excess revenues, and then the actual numbers came in the other direction. So we did take out of fund balance simply just to get those additional capital improvements done. Our next fund, the Wastewater Fund, it saw about $14.5 million in revenue for fiscal year 24-25. These numbers are going to be a little bit different than what you see in the financial statements. I modified these numbers so that they did not incorporate anything that had to do with the sewer lateral program. The city currently receives what's called an in lieu fee from real estate transactions. This in lieu fee is meant to be essentially saved until we do a large lower sewer lateral replacement project. So because real estate transactions happen unrelated to the city business, we expect to receive those fees ahead of time. Deploying the money that we receive doesn't happen very quickly. We typically have to go out to bid and then wait for construction season. So you'll see a large accumulation of these fees, and eventually over time we will spend it on replacing those lower sewer laterals. On the expenditure side, again, not anything real exciting. We mostly saw these categories come in under budget. Overall, we spent about $1.1 million less than what we had anticipated. A lot of that had to do with just a lack of activity when it came to capital outlay. So capital outlay is a little bit different than what the monies we spend on projects. This has to do with individual pieces of equipment and many small dollar purchases. So a lot of times the wastewater system has a pretty robust equipment list. So we tend to, or typically what happens is that even though we budget for these purchases, the time it takes to initiate or complete the purchase usually is more than our staff can achieve. So it's not uncommon to see both the monies that we spend on projects or equipment come far under what we budgeted for. And again, as you can see, we projected just under a $200,000 surplus, and ultimately the surplus was about $1.3 million. This is actually good news, because what this does is by producing a surplus in the wastewater fund, that will ultimately reduce the need to raise rates further than they need to go. Because when we have a surplus that goes into fund balance, and then there's a certain level of fund balance we think is adequate. So when our fund balance is greater than what we need to have for a rainy day, which that's where it's at today, that means that we can deploy some of that cash towards capital projects, therefore reducing the level of rate increases that we'll see in the future. And again, none of that surplus had to do with the monies that we received for the sewer lateral effort.
So I'm wondering if, have we thought about creating a separate fund for those sewer lateral in lieu payments? I think just for transparency, because I think the idea is that the in lieu payment will cover like 80% of the cost, and then the city picks up the other 20%. But when you bury all of that within the wastewater fund, I feel like it's a little difficult to see. So have you guys thought about having its own separate fund to track those there?
Yeah, we intend to create the new fund during the mid-year process. So I actually have to get permission or approval to create a new fund. So we'll do the essentially we'll do the math and then and that will be part of the mid-year presentation. But yeah, it would certainly make the finance department's or the finance department staff happy to essentially separate all that data out, because there's been many a times where we have to do that manually. And by having a separate fund, it kind of does that automatically. So,
and then, do you know how many properties are sold every year? I'm just thinking, like
in Eureka,
yeah.
I think the average is around 250.
Okay, so like 1.6 million a year almost in lieu fees.
It's about we're seeing about 1 million.
Okay. So yeah, having all of that activity in its own fund sounds easier to track, because the projects, I imagine, cross years.
Yeah, and we're a little bit late on the new projects, so we should expect that fund balance in that new fund to be roughly 2 million is what I would estimate.
And then, do we have those funds in interest earning accounts?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the city has what's called pooled cash. So we have, very few bank accounts, but we're able to track cash level. We have, I'd say, 50 plus funds, which all have a cash balance. So we use the accounting system to capture average daily balances in each fund. And then at the end of the year, when I know our total interest earnings, I can allocate out the revenues based on the average cash in those funds. Onto the harbor. So overall, the harbor is a much smaller enterprise than both water and wastewater, but it's definitely still an enterprise. It's had many years of struggle, but it's somewhat turning around. As you can see, our charges for services came in a little bit higher than anticipated. So when you see charges for services, this mostly means rent or leases. So we get revenues from people that house their boats in our harbor, but we also own quite a bit of real estate on the waterfront. So the facility that Pacific Choice operates out of, and then a number of other adjacent facilities. Those are actually city-owned properties. So the harbor receives a lot of rent revenue, which it uses to maintain the waterfront as well as the wharfinger and the small boat basin.
And you get the tidelands along the waterfront too, don't
Correct.
you?
Yep.
Yeah.
So we actually get money or we get rent income from oyster production. So yeah, it's pretty well diversified, but because it's costly to keep up with harbors, they're just like a boat. They're kind of a money pit. It's been hard to get monies that exceed, or it's hard to get revenue that exceeds our operational costs. That intergovernmental revenue line, that's revenue that we receive from the state because the old redevelopment agency backed some of the loans that the harbor fund received to do improvements. And with when the redevelopment agencies dissolved, the state stepped in and will cover the debt service costs until that debt obligation is exhausted.
And another question, are you budgeting or forecasting for the next dredging? Because I know there's been a lot of problems on the boat basin as far as dredging the harbor, or not the harbor, but the boat basin.
Yeah, that's a great point. I actually forgot about that. We are definitely forecasting, and I'd say this is maybe one of the bigger financial challenges that we face. Dredging is extremely expensive. And because of where the harbor is located, it tends to receive a significant amount of silt. So that's going to be a struggle to find the money to do that, but we are committed to dredging, and we have a history of getting it done. So we're doing our best to figure out ways to essentially lower the long-term costs of that effort.
Yeah, and do you work with the Harbor District and the Corps of Engineers for when they're dredging maybe the outer harbor or the
Yeah,
jetty?
we certainly
When they come
we have
inside.
many discussions with the Harbor District about this. They have the same issues as we do, and we do our best to work together to lower the cost through economies of scale. But it still tends to come in at a price tag that's hard to believe.
Oh, it's unreal. Yeah. Thank you.
Are you guys going to get any of the money from the big wind grant that the Harbor District is working on?
Not that I'm aware of. There is a potential that if there is a build out of a wind farm or manufacturing that requires more vessels to come into Humboldt Bay, that that in itself will hopefully be a revenue source for dredgers to come in more often. And I think that would be one potential for us to piggyback off of to ensure that we can keep our harbor dredged. We are also looking into small dredges that the city staff could operate. One of the biggest bottlenecks or hurdles is that those dredge spoils have to go somewhere, and typically disposal of the dredge spoils are just as expensive as getting them out of the bay. So it's quite a challenge. I do want to point out that the general fund does subsidize the harbor fund. That has happened since the voters approved Measure H. The subsidy has not grown. It simply ensures that we do not create a negative fund balance in this fund. On the expense side, we did have a few categories that went over budget. There's a number of issues here. Our electric bills are coming in higher than we anticipated. We've been utilizing services to remove old vessels from the harbor. That tends to be very expensive. We have received grants to help us with that. And then in that miscellaneous category, we did write off some bad debt. That doesn't have a direct impact on the cash we have in the bank, but you do want to recognize it so that your revenues are adequate or are accurate. Sorry. But overall, we saw a minor overage. So about 5% over what we budgeted. But when we compare our revenues to expenditures, we forecasted a $40,000 surplus and ended the year with a $30,000 surplus. So I'd say roughly balanced, which is good news. And then finally, our building fund. Again, the building fund is not a huge enterprise. It's a fraction of water or wastewater, but a very important operation. So we saw permit revenues come in about 5% higher, or charges for services. We do get other revenue, or we recognize other revenues for code violations. We tend to use code violations as something to encourage property owners to act on something that is unsafe or under code. Sometimes, despite the bills we send out for violation charges, we don't always collect. So sometimes that revenue is misleading, because even though we booked $90,000 at the end of the day, we might only receive a fraction of that. And on the expenditure side, you might understand what I'm talking about, because if you look at that miscellaneous category, again, I have bad debt expense in there, and we wrote off about $95,000 of bad debt. So that's why looking at charges for services or the permit fees is really the way to understand what the fund is capable of supporting when it comes to operational cost. It's important to understand your revenue streams, not just in total dollar value, but in what it actually provides at the end of the day. And sometimes giving or applying fines to properties or individuals, even though we might not collect on them, it is important to ensure that things are safe and done according to code or our regulations. So overall, we overspent by about $70,000. But again, because we saw additional revenues than we anticipated, we actually ended the year with a small surplus. So that concludes this section of the presentation. So, overall, there weren't any big unanticipated differences in what we budgeted, which was good news. And most of our major funds came in better than we had anticipated when we adopted the budget. So, I think we had a really good fiscal year 24-25. Hopefully we can continue that into the future. All right, next section is bond financing. So I'll start with facility projects. And I did touch on this at the last meeting we had. Some of the slides I have reused. So the one obvious project, or at least for me, obvious project, is the new courtyard. It's been talked about in the news. As you can see, here's the outpost mentioning it at one of our council meetings. There's a conceptual design. It's not going to look just like that, but it should look close, or it should resemble some of that. So that was the main driver of going out for bond financing. And to just give you more information about the courtyard. So if you see there in the middle, there's Pearson's Building Center, and then we have the Lost Coast Brewery at the bottom right. So the new courtyard will be located on that parcel, or the one that's I circled in red. So it's about a 7-acre site. We purchased the property back in fiscal year 23-24, and we broke ground this summer. We've only spent about $3 million of the $21 million that we've allocated from the bonds, so we still have a ways to go, but we expect this facility to be completed hopefully at the end of 2026, but it might have to get, depending on the weather, it might end up being 2027 when we occupy the new facility. The current courtyard is adjacent to Costco. The big driver of relocating the courtyard was the fact that it's located in a tsunami zone. And with all our heavy machinery being at the courtyard, that is stuff we will need if, we ever have a major event, including a tsunami. So this is from the old slide, or from the old presentation. So our goal was a $32 million bond, with the courtyard absorbing about 21 million of that, and then about 5.5 million going to a city hall project where we replace the outside of the building. The outside of the building is referred to as an apron. It essentially controls or it has a big part in the HVAC system. It was completed in the 70s, so as you might have noticed, the temperature in the room can be very different if you're on the first floor or the third floor or the south side or the north side of the building. So it's time to upgrade it. So that we estimate that will be roughly $4 million. And then we have the world's slowest elevator that needs upgrading too. So that's likely to be another $1 million. And then the remainder of the funds is we're gonna dedicate that to the municipal auditorium, which has great rehab needs. It also has very good, it has an old schoolhouse connected to the auditorium where we think we can rehab that space into nice new office spaces for our staff, because we've added some staff over the years and we're starting to bust at the seams. So instead of acquiring new real estate, we decided it was better to improve the real estate we already have.
The Muni Auditorium, where does that stand seismically? Is it?
Well, the bond investors were very interested in this, but it was retrofitted in the 90s. So if you go into the auditorium section, or even the school section, you will notice that there is a skeleton, or you'll see the reinforcement. So it is seismically, or I can't say that. It could withstand an earthquake. It just needs interior improvements and some ADA improvements too. So
Okay, thank you.
so we anticipated about a $2 million annual debt service payment, where the general fund would take on about $860,000 of that per year, and water and wastewater about $550,000 per fund. This came from our underwriters, or the firm that helped us issue the bonds. So on August 6th, we went out to market. So the par amount, or what we advertised, was a $32 million bond. We received a premium of about $1.6 million. So investors saw our bonds as a little more favorable at that interest rate, which was good news, because it provided. So currently we have 31 million in a bank account for projects, and then we have another 2.1 million in a reserve account. We hope in a couple of years that instead of having a cash reserve, we can purchase insurance, which will then release that $2 million cash reserve for the projects. So overall, we should have about 33 million from the bond issuance for these projects. The true interest cost was about 4.9%, which compared to mortgages isn't too bad. These bonds will be paid off in 2055. I'm Pepra, so I'll still be here. And then the annual cost is about 2.1 million, about $100,000 more than we anticipated. And then over the life of the bonds, we'll pay about 64 million. So just like a mortgage, you pay about double what the principal is. But because of these products, because of the bond tools, we can do big capital projects. It's really what builds cities and the country. So, all right, next we have another bond financing that hasn't occurred yet, but the project has started. So we will be going out to market to issue bonds from the wastewater system. The big project is this Eliminate Bypass project you'll see in our capital improvement plan that's available on the city's website. The idea of this project is that instead of when it's the wet season and there's a lot of rain, our plant can't handle the effluent from using the toilets or the wastewater system, plus the rain that gets into the system. So what has happened in the past or is currently happening is that because of the additional water, we assume that that additional water diluted the wastewater, and essentially we allowed it to go out into the bay because the combination of the treated wastewater, and the stormwater combined, we thought it would be safe, and it has been safe enough. But there are stricter rules nowadays, so in order to keep our permit current, we have to complete this project to ensure that despite a winter storm, that we can process everything that goes through. And that's a big driver of the sewer lateral program, because over time, those sewer laterals that connect the residents to the system, they start to deteriorate and allow stormwater to come in. So over time, we are treating more and more water, or water that's entered the system that isn't truly wastewater. So this is kind of there's a lot going on beyond the sewer lateral program and this project. We have a multifaceted strategy to help reduce what gets to the treatment plant. So this project actually came in at about 17 million, which was less than the 20 million that we anticipated. The city is going to pay about 65% or 13 million of that project, and HCSD the other 35%. That will require the wastewater fund to absorb about $800,000 in debt service payments going forward. So this is the last section. Just an outlook of what we have for the remainder of the fiscal year. So in February, I anticipate the financial statements being finalized. That is important to issue new debt. Also in February, the city typically goes through the mid-year process. This is where departments get together with the finance department to go over their budget and to make any changes to their line items. We try not to add to the budget during this process. We try to reallocate, but sometimes we do make organizational changes that result in budget increases. In February, we're likely to kick off another rate study. So our current rate study concludes at the end of fiscal year 26-27. So we do have one more planned rate increase coming in July. So this study will the study will be conducted now, but the result will be a recommendation of rate increases starting in fiscal year 27-28 and likely going for the next 5 years after the start of that fiscal year.
How do these capital projects factor into the rate study?
So when you conduct a rate study, you have to do a lot of forecasting. So typically what happens is I'll take on the operational side of that because I just take historical data and I can project in the future using the historical data. And that probably captures about, I'd say 30 to 50% of the potential rate increases. But the majority of the rate increases really come from the capital improvement program. So the engineering department, as well as the public works department, they're the ones that forecast or come up with the project list. So the combination of looking out regarding your operational costs plus what the city engineer thinks we need to accomplish within that rate study timeframe, that data is collected by a consultant, and they provide us with recommendations about how much to increase rates and how to allocate those rates to different customer classes, whether that's residential or commercial or multifamily. One of the struggles that we've seen is in that or who to allocate to. Historically, we've seen a lot more commercial activity. That today, that commercial activity is not as robust as it once was, so that tends to force the rates onto the residential classes.
I think I was mostly thinking of the like $600,000 in debt service to those bonds and how that will impact the rate study, right? So we'll update the rates so that the funds will be sufficient to cover that debt service as well, or is that done through like a different process?
It's well, the debt service payment, it's not in addition to, because you have two ways of financing projects. You can get financing or get debt, or you can use cash. So if I'm paying for a debt service payment for a project, then I'm not paying cash for a project. So it doesn't necessarily in itself mean that I have to raise rates more. And sometimes there's more reason to do financing versus pay in cash. So I don't want to say automatically that will increase costs. The thing that increases cost is the level of projects that you want to accomplish. That said, if there's in 1 year, if there's a really high interest rate, that's going to add additional costs. So it's really the interest portion of that debt that we should focus on to see if we're better off just collecting cash, or if in a low interest rate environment, you might want to take debt even though you have cash in the bank. So it's really, until the study is done, we won't know how much that this project or that bond issuance will have on the rates.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, we still need to get that project done.
Right.
So in this case, we decided that financing is the better option, because the alternative would be to essentially draw down all our cash reserves to zero, and that would leave us exposed, if something were to go south.
So the $600,000 in debt payments, it's not a 1-to-1 for what we can expect the ratepayers to pay. Maybe it's some other factor.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a 25-to-1 or something like that. So, okay.
Yeah, we'll continue to utilize financing and utilize pay-as-you-go or using cash in real time. So it's really a balance of the two. And then April through June, that's when we typically do the budget process. That's a multi-month process. And then in June, I expect to go to market for the wastewater bonds. So my part of this was to talk to you guys about when we think it's a good time to hold additional FAC meetings.
Okay, again, your fiscal year is July 1?
Yep.
Okay.
We can have, I think January would be way too soon. Yeah. I also think February might also be too soon, because the mid-year process, it can inform the committee, but it's typically not I don't see an approval or like a recommendation coming out of that process, unless there's a talk of big changes, like organizational changes or adding new services. If that was the case, I think it would be appropriate to come to you guys beforehand, but because most of the time it's just moving things between line items, I think it would be better timing to have a second meeting in the month of March prior to the budget process, so that we can review what has happened between now and then, and to then talk about when we would want to bring back the committee. Hopefully this time we could do a joint council committee meeting. I think that's the most efficient process because I'd like to bring the departments to the meeting so that they can answer questions for both the council as well as the finance advisory committee. Trying to get schedules aligned to do 2 events like that tends to be really difficult.
Lane, I have a question. When do you expect the audit to be completed and have so that we could find out what the findings, if any, were?
So I believe the audit will be completed by the end of February, if not sooner. So that March meeting we'd be able to bring the financial statements with us. So maybe we can plan for March, kind of just check in, kind of like the meeting tonight, and then we can at that meeting talk about what would be an ideal time to hopefully have that joint budget study session with the council, and then a final, maybe an additional one more meeting before the end of the fiscal year, so that you guys would have a chance to make a recommendation to the council before the budget is adopted.
For the March meeting, do your auditors come and give the presentation of the audited financial statements, or do you just have staff do that?
They typically don't come to give a presentation. Not to say that we're not interested in having them actually show up and do that.
I mean, they could be on Zoom or something. I don't mean like in person.
Yeah. I don't know if that will happen this fiscal year, but there's no reason why I can't present the financial statements to the committee myself. And the financial statements are posted to the website. A big part of the process is getting them done and then distributing them out to the different stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. I think it would be nice for the finance advisory committee to know who the auditors are, or to meet them, or to like see who they are. I think one of our charges is that we may be utilized to help staff look for different auditors. Not saying that we need to look for different auditors. It's just a nice thing to do every 7 years or so to make sure that we still have a good relationship with them. So it would just be nice for the fact to know who they are. Like, I don't even know the company who is our auditors.
Is it still Moss, Levi, Hartzheim?
Yeah.
And Wilson?
Committee member Byfield knows them well. So.
Yeah. That's the reason I showed up early today.
How many years have they been our auditor?
Since 2013, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, so how it works with auditing firms, as long as you change the partner that's in charge of the audit, you can keep the same firm, which tends to be, or it's helpful because when you start with a new firm, you start fresh, and it tends to extend the process out without, and it doesn't necessarily reduce risk, or at least so we're very happy with our auditors because we've learned to live together. All right, well, Jessica and I will take note, and we will aim for March to come back with the financial statements and to do some pre-planning for the budget process.
I'm just wondering, I don't know how we put things on the agenda for this committee, but if in March we could do, like, we could get the committee terms and the list of all of those, have that part of the agenda, and maybe we could at that meeting talk about the chair and the vice chair, because I think that's something that we haven't talked about in a long time. It's just been...
It's something we usually do at the first meeting of the year. Our first meeting of the year has been like April or after.
I mean, I've been on the committee for I think 3 years now, and we've never had the conversation about the chair or the vice chair. We just show up and who wants to run the meeting. So I think we could just have it on the agenda, and we could maybe talk about it at the March meeting, and then at the first meeting of the next fiscal year, we could actually go through and do those sorts of things.
We'll be doing that in March because that's what we do the first meeting of the year.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you
So
mean the
March.
calendar year?
Yeah.
I think in fiscal years. I'm sorry. We're here at the FAC, so I was thinking
In the
fiscal
calendar
years.
year, that'll happen. So March will be our first meeting. So we'll open the meeting, and the first thing you guys will do is nominate or vote on who you would like to have the chair and the vice chair be for the next 2 years or a year.
Great.
because we're supposed to do that, I guess, every year.
Okay.
And we have a term that's expiring too. So
Yeah.
we'll see if he wants to re-up his term.
Okay.
And I was looking back through my emails. I had an email from beginning of this year where James, right, I put it in here. Dennis, Bill, Dave, and James were all up this year, and since nobody said anything, they just re-upped you for another 2 years. So
Great.
We did, huh? Hey,
there you go.
Congrats. Look at that.
So,
And then one other thing on the minutes from the last meeting, we talked about getting the bylaws, or maybe it's the charter. I don't know. It's probably the charter for the committee sent out to the committee members, and I don't think I ever saw that come my way. So
I just found it again, so
Great.
I'll make sure I send it in an email to you guys tomorrow.
Cool.
There's not a whole lot to it.
Yeah. And then maybe this is just a workshop between Lane and I, but before the next like financials presentation for the budget and everything, I would love to spend a little bit of time diving into the cost allocations because I still don't understand them. I don't understand how I just don't understand them entirely. I see them, where they're appearing, and I get the idea of allocating, if you have finance staff who are working on, facilities payroll, you want to allocate a certain portion of that. But I just need to understand how the personnel figures and allocating falls into all of that. And I totally understand, a janitorial crew getting allocated to all the different departments that they go and help. I just would love to spend a little bit more time understanding that before the next budget. So
No problem.
Cool.
That's I'd be happy to present on that. I don't ever get questions like that. But I created a model that's circular, and I'm actually, I enjoy it. So,
Is staff
but I
hours
can
the
boil it
driver
down.
there?
What's that?
Is staff hours the driver for what the allocation?
No, that would be so onerous. That I try to choose allocation formulas that are easy to replicate and that don't have much volatility in them, because the last thing you want is your cost allocation numbers jumping around, because departments really do not like that those line items are in their budget because they think they don't have control. That's right. But if I'm using number of personnel, that's really in their control. So it's not the easiest thing to explain, but for this group, I would feel very comfortable doing a presentation like that. Not many people have much interest other than my accountants. So.
I'm interested. I like that kind of stuff.
I'm not an accountant.
And then hopefully at the March meeting, we'll have the sewer lateral program broken out too.
That'll be good.
So it'll be, I don't know if this committee is as interested as other groups, but I think it's good to pay attention to. So if there's no questions about the presentation, then
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you so much, Lane. Great presentation, very clearly presented to us. And it's 6:03, and meeting is adjourned, and we'll meet again in March, and you'll give us a heads up when we're supposed to show up. Thank you very
sounds
much.
good. Thank you very much.